If you're looking for the best controller settings, you came to the right place. Once you get to your controller settings, the first thing you're going to want to pay attention to is my bumpers being flipped. I like my bumpers being flipped because when I switched to claw, it made it a lot easier to use the bumpers rather than triggers. I don't play claw anymore, but I still prefer it. Next, we're going to take a look at edit button layout and move into this screen. You'll notice my settings are set to default flipped, and if you take a look at the drop down, everything's going to be set to flip because, as I mentioned before, my bumpers are flipped, so that's just going to be the default of how it's set up. I use a default setup because I have extra buttons on my controller, but I'll talk about that as a bonus at the end of the video. Default can be great, but if you're a new player, I'd highly recommend playing either tactical or bumper jumper tactical flipped. If you take a look at the right side of the screen on the controller, you can see the things highlighted in blue that are actually changed from the default setup. On default, we have some things highlighted in blue because we have our bumpers flipped, meaning our triggers and bumpers do the opposite. Moving on to tactical, which I highly recommend, swaps out our R3 and circle button. If you don't know, R3 is when you press in the right stick. On the default setup, if you take a look at the bottom right, our melee is actually our R3, so every time we press in our right stick is how we're going to melee someone in game. Our circle button is change stance, slide, and dive behavior, which is really important. We're using all the time because we want to be able to slide cancel. When slide canceling, this makes it way easier because all you have to do is press X and the right stick. Keeping your thumb on the right stick is always the most important thing because you always want to be able to aim as much as possible. Moving on to some other ones I recommend. Some of my friends have really used bumper jumper tactical and it's worked really well for them, so I highly recommend bumper jumper tactical or one of these other ones. They seem to do the same thing. I haven't tested them myself, but I know for a fact bumper jumper tactical is really good for the simple fact that we're actually using our L2 in this scenario to be able to jump. That way we can jump with our index finger on our left hand using the left trigger rather than moving our thumbs, which again can make it a lot easier to be doing slide cancels and movement around the map. Generally, our stick layout is going to be set to default, but if you want to take a look at those, you're more than welcome to. Controller vibration, we're always going to want to have off. Moving into dead zones, I actually think these are really important and not enough people pay attention to them. Dead zone is actually based off your controller, which is why a lot of people don't actually speak on them when they're talking about their settings. For the left and right stick minimum, you're really going to want to think hard about if you have a lot of stick drift on your controller. The stick drift looks something like this, where my character is actually moving and I'm not actually touching the sticks at all. Sometimes this can actually affect your aim on your right stick or your left stick with your movement stick. I have both of mine set to 0 because it doesn't have a huge effect on my controller because my controller has minimal stick drift. The reason is, even if you have stick drift, it makes your controller way more responsive when you are actually making quick turns or quick moves on your sticks. To completely stop stick drift from happening, you're going to want to do something similar to this. To stop your stick drift, all you're going to do is want to head into the firing range and actually line up your crosshair with a straight line. So on this pole right here, I lined up my crosshair, but we can actually see that it's moving a little bit to the left. That means I'm getting stick drift on my right stick. All I would have to do is go right into my settings, into my dead zone, and actually input up my left stick min. So that means it will actually reduce the amount or increase the amount I actually need to touch the right stick to be able to accept the input that's happening. So again, I'm still seeing it. I'll bump it up by 2 this time, move it back over, and as we can see, I'm still actually moving. So all we're going to want to do is just repeat the process and continue on to the point where we're no longer seeing our crosshair move after it's lined up. If you're getting it on your right stick, just add a little bit, little by little. I'm sure it will go away. For your max on your left and right stick, this is actually pretty important because I have mine set to weird settings where I have one set at 40 and one set at 90. The reason my left stick is set at 40 is because most of the time in this game, you're going to be sprinting a lot of the time. And to be able to get into a full sprint, you're going to need to move your left stick all the way from where it is to the corner of the controller or to the space you have to move your analog stick. If you actually reduce that and bring down your left stick max, you'll be able to hit the max peak of your speed or where you would be at a sprint or moving backwards, whichever direction, much faster than you would be if it was set to something like 100, where a lot of people actually have it set at. Moving on to my right stick, your right stick actually helps you aim. So having more operability, having more command for little adjustments that you can make is actually makes it a little bit better to have a little bit of a higher right stick max, but honestly, this is purely preference. I used to play this at about 85 or 80, and I recently started moving it up because I wanted to have a little bit more adjustability inside of some of those ranges where I just felt like I needed it. For the triggers, they're similar to the left and right stick min. You just want to get them as low as possible. I found myself fat fingering a lot when I had them set to 0. I set them to like 1 or 2 for a while and then reduced them again. So do with it what you want. If you think you can just get it done without doing anything, just set them to 0 as low as they can possibly go without them actually activating, without you clicking them. The aiming tab is really important important because we're going to be going over sensitivity. Sensitivity has a wide range of things that we can actually look for and do. My highest recommendation is doing something from 6.6 to 8.8. These are some of the 3 best sensitivities that you could possibly using. They give the best movement for Warzone, and genuinely I think having something a little higher could even be acceptable. I wouldn't go lower than 6, but I would for sure even go up to something like 13, which is on the really high end. The issue with something like having a higher sensitivity, which sometimes people really enjoy because they can hit 180 no scopes or crazy clips, is just because of the fact that it's harder to actually stabilize and do something called centering. If you don't know what centering is, I'm sure I can make a video on it explaining and going over some other tips about Warzone in that video, but for right now we're not going to focus on centering. But it's way easier to have centering and good centering at a lower sensitivity, where you have a lot more control over where your crosshair is actually going, and your stick movement is way more fine-tuned at a lower sensitivity. A lot of pros play at 6, some pros play at higher sensitivities. I would recommend something in the middle. Find a really good base ground and test out a few things. Moving on to ADS sensitivity multiplier. This is also really important because this actually depends on our stick sensitivity. So that means when we're ADS'd, we're aiming down sights, we're going to be actually lowering or increasing our sensitivity. You're actually able to put this above 1 if you want to. But what all I do is actually lower it a little bit less, because we want our aim to be as precise as possible, and lowering it at a higher sensitivity, which I think can be something like 8, which is pretty high in comparison to what some other people run. I would recommend lowering my ADS sensitivity. That way, in situations where someone throws a smoke grenade and you actually lose aim assist completely, you don't want your crosshair to be going and jumping across the screen in every direction. Okay, so when we lower it, we'll actually have a little bit more control over what's actually happening, and it'll actually help us track our enemies much easier on the screen. I recommend something like 80%, but it depends. If you're going on to a higher sensitivity, something like a 13, you might want to even reduce this down to something like 40, to be completely honest. But this comes down to a lot of testing. This is what I would recommend, something similar to what I'm on. Try this out, see what you like the best. Scroll down a little bit and we find our aim assist section. Make sure your aim assist is turned on. Please make sure your aim assist is turned on. Our aim assist type should be set to default. Some people recommend different things. Default is by far the best. I would not recommend anything else because it is just way better. Now let's move on to our gameplay tab. Starting off, we have automatic sprint, and we want to change this to automatic tactical sprint. This means we don't have to press in our left stick to actually get to the sprint where our gun is in the air. That means we can move around the map much faster and not have to spam the left stick to sprint every single time we want to start running. Moving down the list, the next thing we want to take a look at is slide/dive behavior. I'm using hybrid. I highly recommend using hybrid. This is, in my opinion, the best setting that you can possibly be using because it allows us to slide and dive, which some of these options do allow with tap to dive and tap to slide. This actually makes diving and sliding much cleaner because we can only dive when we're at a full sprint and holding down the dive button for a certain period of time, whereas with the slide we can just tap and use it really cleanly, and this really helps our slide cancel. Automatic parachute is a preference, but I recommend having this turned off. I've never seen any pros have it turned on. It just makes your landing in much cleaner. After we keep scrolling down under our combat behaviors, we're going to see interact/reload behavior, and we're going to want to change this to prioritize interact. This is going to allow us, when we're moving around the map, to actually pick up items way quicker, and it's really useful because you don't want to spend time holding down square or E, whatever button it is, to actually be able to kind of go grab weapons, grab things off the floor or wherever, and keep moving. The next thing is armor plate behavior. I have it set on apply all. I highly recommend this setting. It is by far saved me a ton of times because it makes it really easy to kind of find and put in all my plates at once, and I can always cancel it if I don't want to put in all my plates at the same time. Moving on from the settings portion of the video, I want to really recommend getting a controller similar to this. So I actually have some buttons on the back here. As you can see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 extra buttons, and these are actually doing what these front facing buttons actually do, which makes it way easier to be able to hit and do things like the slide cancel, put in plates, and even interact with things on the floor to be able to pick them up. Controllers like this can get really expensive, and if you don't have the money to spend $150 or even $200 or $300, which some controllers can go up to if you're customizing them a lot, which you really don't need to, as long as you're getting a few buttons on the back and you're happy with it. That's the main thing. As long as you have a few buttons on the back, that's really the main thing that you need. There are some upgrades that you can do with controllers, like on the sticks or on the triggers, but you really don't need those. The main things is having the buttons on the back to be able to press those buttons while keeping your thumbs on the stick. This gives you a huge advantage when doing things like slide cancel, and again is why I play default in my settings. My thumbs are always on the sticks, and whenever I need to press a button, I'm using the buttons on the back of the controller, and this helps out a ton and makes it way easier to play the game. I would highly recommend either getting a controller like this, but if you can't afford it, like I mentioned before, there are tons of really good options. You don't even need 4 buttons. A lot of the really good players I play with and know only use 2 buttons. So what I would recommend is finding some type of attachment, things that you can put on your controller and actually allow you to do those things without needing to spend tons of money on a controller like this. I highly recommend it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys updated your settings. I'll catch you guys later, and have a great rest of your day.